All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this month's edition of RELO Andes webinars. RELO Andes is the Regional English Language Office. It's run out of the U.S. Embassy in Lima, Peru. It is headed by Micah Risher, the RELO officer, and Marcela Raffo. My name is Maggie Steingraeber. I am an English language fellow who is based here out of Lima, Peru. I am the coordinator and host for these webinars, so any questions or comments you have about the webinars in the confirmation email that you received on registering, you will see my contact, so please feel free to contact me with any feedback that you have for us. So these webinars are meant for English teachers. So we are all English teachers who produce it, so with that, we try to make this as engaging and interactive for you as possible. So for those of you who are new to webinars, I just want to take a few minutes before we begin to just go through the software so that you can see how the engagement tools work and what you can do to interact with us. The first thing, the Citrix is the software that you are using, so I'm sure when you received your confirmation email, it was from this, also known as GoToWebinar. That is us. If everything went okay with if you're connected with us now, everything was okay with the download. This is your control panel. You should see something similar to this on your screen now. Please note that you are muted and you will remain muted throughout the remainder of the webinar. We also will not be turning on any webcams just due to connectivity issues. We just want to make sure that everyone is able to connect. Your control panel, if it bothers you, you can either collapse it or expand it using this orange arrow here. If it doesn't bother you, leave it open. If you'd like to see the webinar full screen and you don't want to look at this, then you can minimize it so you don't have to look at it. All right. So some of the different ways that you can interact with us throughout the webinar when we go through it. First is the chat box. The chat box works like any other chat box that you've probably used on social media. Just type into it any messages that you send there will go to us and we'll be able to see them. So just to make sure that everyone has the chat box also labeled questions, both are the same. If you found it, it's here. If you could just type into it so that we know that you found it, just say a quick hello and where you are joining us from. So I have Joan who found it, hello, and Daniel, Lisette, Julio, hello, hello from Lima, Victor also from, all right, a lot of people from Lima. Perfect, all right. Looks like a lot of you found it. Someone from Piura, and from USA. Excellent. From San Miguel, oh, perfect. Okay, great. So throughout this webinar, if questions come up, if a technical problem comes up and you need assistance, please type it into this box and we'll be able to help you with it. Also, if you have questions throughout the presentation about something that the presenter talks about, please feel free to type in the questions as they come up. We will save questions until the very end of the presentation. So once the presenter is finished, we will go back to any questions that have been asked throughout the webinar. So please feel free to type into that box if you have any technical or content questions or any other thing that you'd like to add into the chat box. Throughout the presentation, the presenter will also be asking you questions in order to interact and get your ideas. This is also the same place where you would type in those responses and we'll be able to see them. All right. Then the next tool that we have is hand raising. The hand raising is this tool here that looks just like a hand. And the idea with this is meant to imitate a normal classroom where if you had a question or you wanted the teacher's attention, you could raise your hand. Unfortunately, with the amount of people that we have, if you raise your hand, we might overlook you, but we will be using this tool just to take quick polls of how many of you think something, or if you've had an experience of something, if you agree, disagree, for example. So just to make sure that everyone has found the hand raising tool, if you could click on it just so that there we go, just so that we know that you found it. Looks like a lot of you found it. Oh, there we go. 22% of you found it. Just click on it just so that we know, raise your hand so that we know that you're there and that you know how to raise your virtual hand. Perfect. Great. All right. The next tool, we'll go back, is polls. There's going to be several polls throughout this webinar. We don't have a practice one ready to go, but the presenter will ask questions. This is just like any kind of multiple choice question where we just want to take a quick poll of the audience on their experiences with something, which answer they think is correct, about how often they do something, etc. So when those polls come up, that's something that you can click right on the screen and share your response, and we'll be able to see how many of you think one thing or another. The next is handouts. You can see on your control panel that there is a separate tab for handouts, and there are 5 handouts that are available for this webinar now. Once the webinar closes after this hour, the handouts will not be available for download. So if you would like the handouts, please begin the download now so that you have them. Once the webinar is no longer active, you will not be able to access the handouts. If you are having a problem with the downloads and you're not able to get them in time, again, just send me an email to that same address that's in your confirmation, and I will be able to send you the handouts if you're unable to get them. All right, and finally, at the very end of this webinar, there's a very quick survey. We have 3 questions for you, and again, we're trying to make these webinars as relevant to you as possible, so it's a couple of quick questions. It'll only take a minute. We just want to know where you're joining us from and how many people you're with. A lot of people like to watch in viewing parties, so it just helps to give us a better idea of who our audience is. For this webinar, we've added 1 additional question. We've had requests about changing the time. Since a lot of you are in class late, you're unable to join the live version. So we have a couple different timing options. So if you could respond to us and let us know which time works best for you, we might be able to adapt the schedule of the webinars in order to suit your schedules better. So please take just a minute at the very end of this webinar when the survey comes up to open it and respond to it. It'll help us out a lot. Move on to Plan B. Like any good teacher, you always have a Plan B. So we'll reschedule the webinar on TOEFL IBT when we can get a better connection. But just since a lot of you are here, we'll just go on with a different topic that's still relevant to English teaching. It's not about TOEFL IBT, but we'll make do with it. So we apologize for the inconvenience of having to switch topics on you, but again, technical difficulties. Again, we will reschedule Ellen's presentation for a different time when we can have a better connection and make sure that everything's working so we have a better quality presentation for you. But since we're all here already, I'll just go on with a different topic. Something that I'm personally interested in is on learner training. So I'll make a quick presentation for you guys. Again, switch of topics. We will alert you if you join our mailing list. If you contact us, we will let you know when things are rescheduled. So please fill out that survey at the very end so we know when is best for you. All right, so the first thing, we're going to talk about learner training. Again, there's no poll since this is a Plan B thing, but I just want to see, we're going to talk about learner training. So what do you think I mean when I talk about learner training, which I'll abbreviate as LT. For the rest of this, if you could type in your chat box option A, B, or C, what do you think I mean by learner training? Number one, is it when you try to brainwash your learner to do as you say? Number two, when you teach learners strategies so that they can learn better? Or letter C, when you are trying to get your learners into great physical shape? All right, that was an easy question, just to make sure that your chat box is working and our audio is working and everything's going. Yeah, B. Looks like a lot of you got it. Perfect. Alternative B is better. Yes, it is. Alternative B is the best option. So as a result of this webinar, some things that we'll go through pretty quickly since we're running short on time is we're going to talk about what learner training is, some forms and functions of it, some strategies of how you can implement it into your classroom, and we'll try to see how you can actually apply it to solve some common classroom problems that come up. And also to get you feeling confident about what learner training is and how to practice it. So first off, I just want to begin with a quick definition of what learner training is. This is a definition from the British Council. I'll read it out quickly. The polls, again, you're not getting them because this was a spontaneous presentation, so there's no polls programmed in. So when I say polls, just use your chat box. Learner training involves helping learners to find out how they learn most effectively. It means encouraging learners to take responsibility for learning and helping them to develop learning strategies and study skills. Most importantly, it asks learners to reflect on how they are learning. The aim of learner training is to produce effective, independent language learners. So some key words in this definition. First off, with learner training is that idea of having learners take responsibility for their learning. That's that idea of learner autonomy, so that language, especially with learning a language, it's something that you really need to have the personal drive and will to do it. So with learner training, it puts the responsibility in the hands of the learners by, using the other words we have here, giving them the strategies, giving them the tools to learn languages so that they know where and how they can learn on their own when they're outside of your classroom. Another key part of it is the idea of reflection. It's about seeing what works, what doesn't, and getting to know yourself as a learner and what works for you best. If something works for one person, it might not work for another. So that's where you really need to stress that part of reflection in order to move forward. All right, so learning strategies, which is what we had put in bold here. Just to give you an idea of what we mean by learning strategies. Learning strategies are techniques, actions, and behaviors that learners can employ to aid their learning and understanding. Here you see is a list of different learning strategies. Some help others, some help others more than another would. So some people, again, if you're looking at learning styles and preferences, some people are visual, some people are kinesthetic, some people are audio. So depending on your learning preference, depending on your learning style, different strategies work better for different people. This is a list. There's flashcards, journals, read aloud, summarizing, mnemonic devices, and again, we'll go through what mnemonic devices are. Just if you could just type into the chat box, if you can think of any other strategies that you may know of. Oh yeah, so Josefina says here that learner training is basically just the metacognitive awareness, and that's exactly what it is. It's when that idea of having pulling back that curtain and showing students what you're doing and why you're doing it so that they understand what the purpose is. And the more aware they are of what's happening in the classroom and with their learning, the more likely they can take control of it. So yeah, we have mind maps, that's another great one, reflecting, journals, brainstorming. All of these are great strategies and techniques that aid your learning and aid your understanding. I remember learning Spanish, there was always these mnemonic devices that they would come up with. These are like kind of the rhymes or acronyms that get you to remember something. So a common confusion when you learn Spanish is the this and these with the ese and este. And I'd always have a teacher who would say this and these have the t's. And that little rhyme would always be something that when you're not quite sure would help you because you could go through that rhyme. Or we'd have to memorize the countries in Latin America, and they taught us, my goodness, eating hot nachos causes pain, because each one of those is an acronym that stands for one of the countries, so it helped you to remember it. And again, these are little techniques, and something that can help learners is by sharing these techniques and sharing these ideas. So, with this idea, when you were first learning English or another language, what strategies most helped you? So again, if you could just type these into the chat box, what was most helpful for you? Because we're all, obviously, if you're participating in this webinar, you have a high level of English. And it could be because you're a native speaker or a non-native speaker, but what was it that most helped you to learn English? Or again, if English is your first language and you're learning a different language, what strategy helped you? Rocio has note-taking, memorizing things. Maria Teresa has vocabulary journals and note-taking. Visual people, repetition, songs. Songs are also really helpful. Singing, yeah, kind of like those jazz chants too are another thing that helps people. Watching English TV programs, movies, reading, making associations, songs, playing. Yeah, excellent. And it seems like a common thread with a lot of these responses is basically, yeah, listening to BBC tongue twisters, those are good, is just finding things that are a little different, because I think when things are a little different, they're memorable and they'll stay with you better. All right, so we'll move on. So first, why is learner training beneficial? There's two reasons that I can think of for why it's beneficial. The first is increased self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is I've talked about this in another webinar, it's the perceived ability of a person to successfully complete a task. So how effective do you feel you yourself is? How effective are you at learning something or completing a task? And it's that self-perceived ability that gives you the self-confidence in order to do something. If you think you can do it, you're more willing to go for it and to actually accomplish it. Whereas if you think, no, I can't learn English, it's too hard, then you're probably going to struggle with it a lot more than other people because you're putting in that block in your own mind, or your students if they're doing that to themselves. And the other is increased learner autonomy. It's that idea of taking control of your own learning through heightened metacognitive awareness and self-confidence, which relates back to the idea of self-efficacy. Language learning is something that people can do on their own. Being in a classroom is definitely beneficial. It helps. You need that communication, and having someone there to help you through it is very important. But it's something that if you're on your own, you can still practice, you can still learn through your own willingness and through your own interests. And that's something that learners need to be made aware of, is that they can do it. First off, that they can do it. And second off, that they can continue to do it on their own without the teacher necessarily holding their hand through everything. So I've identified 4, we'll call it components of learner training. The first is learning about yourself. The second is learning by yourself. Third, learning from each other, and learning from yourself. So each one of these is an important part of learning a language and training yourself to learn a language, or training your students. And all 4 of them are necessary for being a strong learner. So we'll go through each one. I think I skipped one. So we'll see what learner training looks like. The first one is learning about yourself. And this is when you allow students to discover and maximize their own learning styles and preferences. So this is like what I was talking about before about which strategies work for you are going to be based off of your own learning style and preference. These are things like the VAC quizzes and learning about who you are as a learner. And different things of how this can manifest itself in the classroom is by taking a metacognitive quiz. I know one of you said, I think it was Josefina, had said that it's basically what learner training is metacognitive awareness. And that's exactly what it is. So instead of trying to do things like sneaking it through or trying to do things where the students aren't quite sure what you're doing and they're not sure where everything is going in the end, one thing you can do is just be very upfront and direct with students. In order to help you learn a language, you should learn about how you learn. And there's different ways to learn. What works for one person doesn't always work for someone else, so try different strategies and see what works for you. And that's where you could give them a quiz. There's plenty of quizzes that are already made. If you go into Google and you type VAC, Visual Auditory Kinesthetic Quiz, or Learning Styles Quiz, you will see a lot come up. You can adapt it from there. You'll be able to get ideas if you want to make your own. And give students this quiz in class and give it to them in English so that they're practicing their English while they're taking this quiz, but they're also learning about themselves. And people like learning about themselves. They like talking about themselves. They like discovering parts of themselves that they didn't know before. So if they've never taken a quiz like this, it could be really interesting. And then ask them at the end, how accurate was the quiz? Do you think it was right? Would you change something? And it gets them thinking about themselves as a learner. With that in mind, now that you're aware of who, and it gives you an idea of who your students are and what works for them. So with that in mind, when you know most of my students are visual, most of my students are kinesthetic, whatever it may be, you know that you can give them diverse forms of input. So you can be catering to those different learning styles once you know who is in your class. And also in giving them production tasks, give them tasks that are open, that let them choose how they want to produce. Instead of just telling them to write an essay or telling them to make a PowerPoint presentation, give them the option, let them express it in a song. If they're very musical, you can let them paint a picture and explain what it means. If they're very artistic or visual, let them choose their medium of production. It gives them a little more, they feel more involved in it. It feels more relevant to them, and it's something that they can really pour themselves into versus if you're always giving them the same prescribed task. Learning independently was the next component that we looked at, and that again goes with the idea of autonomous learning. So you can, together as a class, you can teach each other how to be independent. Because if you just tell your students, go learn this on your own, they might not know how. And again, learning is something that's a skill. Learning a language is a skill that you need to practice, and the more help you have in how to learn effectively, the more likely you are to be successful at it. So here's a quick list of some cognitive strategies that you can give to students in order for them to develop their strengths in learning independently. So when you're not there, what can they do? Teaching them how to make flashcards or helping them to make flashcards. Vocabulary journals or read aloud that can be either with a partner or just on their own. If they're sitting by themselves, the more senses people involve when learning, the more likely they are for it to be memorable. So if they read something out loud to themselves, they're not only reading it, but they're also listening, and they can help with their listening, and they can work on their pronunciation. Summarizing, paraphrasing, setting goals. This is something that's easy to do but often overlooked. And that can be having students say something that they want to do and within a specified time frame. So if they want to be able to watch a certain movie or listen to a certain song or reach a certain part on a test, whatever it is, but just expressing those goals so that they're out there and so people are working towards something. These are the mnemonic devices that I mentioned before. They're just little things that you can do to help you to remember things. And here are some of the examples I gave before. The this and these have the T's for when I was learning Spanish. The my goodness, eating hot nachos causes pain. It actually spells out all of the countries in Latin America if you're taking a geography test. So you have Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. Roy G. Biv is something that we do for the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And interacting with the text. Instead of just asking people to read a text, have them actually interact with it, highlight, make margin notes, whatever it is to get them to have a back and forth with the text. Even though a text is written and it's not going to talk back to you, you can at least interact with it and engage with the text. This is one example of, for people who study Chinese, this is one example that I thought was very creative on, it's CHINEASY is the name of it's actually a book that was published. But it takes these Chinese characters, which when people are learning Chinese, it seems very overwhelming because it's so different from a writing system that you're used to. So what this person did is she takes the characters and she illustrates them so that they're memorable. If I were to just show you the character for person, for example, you might not remember it. But as soon as I put 2 feet and a head on it, all of a sudden it looks like a person. And that little strategy, you're going to remember, how do I write person? Ah, right, it looks like a person. The mouth, ah, it looks like a mouth. As soon as you illustrate it, you're not only going through the process of thinking, how can I remember this, and drawing something to help you engage with it, but then once you're done, you have this product that is helping you to remember. So although this is an example for studying Chinese, there's things that you can do in English. I gave you examples of things for Spanish, and these are just little things that make learning more memorable and help with strategies to help you remember, because learning vocabulary can be very daunting. It can be very overwhelming when you're given a list. But if you're doing something to make it memorable and fun, you're more likely to remember it later versus just memorizing a list and spitting it back out. Learning from each other. Providing opportunities for cooperative learning. So when teaching in a classroom, take advantage of having other people in the room. These are things like think, pair, share activities, letting students think for themselves, talk with a partner, share with the group. Pair and small group work. I know one concern is always, but then won't they speak in Spanish? There's different methods that you can use. Sometimes it's beneficial if they speak in Spanish, because just because they're speaking in Spanish doesn't necessarily mean that they're off task. It could just mean that they're explaining something that maybe someone else didn't understand, or they're helping each other. And I think there's a time and place for that, and it's helpful. Task and project-based learning is another thing. Instead of, every man for himself in a classroom where everyone's trying to get a score individually, have people work together, give them tasks, have them work towards something to create something, and let them do it with each other so they can share ideas and have an extra layer of communication there. So really take advantage of the resource that is each other. And be explicit about your teaching style. So learning from each other doesn't just mean learning from classmates, but also yourself as the teacher. So that idea that I said before of pulling back that curtain of mystery on why you're doing things, just say, this is why I'm doing it. This is the benefit that I see in it, just so that you're aware. And a lot of that, especially with feedback or why you would only speak English for the entire class, what the reason is, stating goals and expectations in the beginning of class so they know where it's going, having an outcome. We're doing this so that you can produce this. Asking for feedback, having students tell you what's working, what's not. Remember that you are a learning community and really playing up on that community aspect of it so that they're learning not just from you with a teacher-funded lesson, but that student-centered idea where everyone is learning from each other, from their classmates, from the teacher, and you, the teacher, who is not on top imparting knowledge down on everyone else, but that it's a more back and forth. That makes a really big difference in the affective way that students view the class, is when they feel comfortable with each other and when they feel comfortable with you. All right, and this last one was learning, self-reflection, learning from yourself. And this goes back to the reflection idea that I had in the beginning, where in that definition of what learner training is, it's reflecting on what's working, what's not, how can it be better, and that's demanding critical reflection in your students in the lessons, so asking them to make connections to themselves and to the real world so that it's not just classroom English, but it's real world English that's relevant to them and that has meaning and purpose. So these can be things like a journal, and a journal can be either private or dialogue. By private, it's something that the student writes and it's only for them, so they can get personal, they can share it if they want, but if it's something really personal, they don't have to share it. A dialogue is when they write out a journal and they give it either to you as the teacher or to another classmate, and they get a response. So you would write something about how you felt, give it to someone, either the teacher or another classmate, and that person would read the journal entry and write a response so that it's a written dialogue, a back and forth. The second one is self-assessment questionnaires. So asking students to self-assess their own ability. It could be self-assess what they know before they go into something. So asking them to self-assess their own communicative level of English, for example. How comfortable are you with this? How good do you think you are at this? And then coming back to it at the end, how much do you think you've learned? How much did this help you? Asking them to think about their own progress. If they turned in an assignment, asking them, what grade would you give yourself on this? How much effort did you put into it? What could you do to make it better? Or did you do everything else that, or is it perfect? Is it everything that you wanted it to be? But that idea of critical reflection, of having them think about both the good and the bad in things. Other one is identifying motivation. So intrinsic and extrinsic, which I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with these terms. Intrinsic means the motivation comes from a personal inside reason, whereas extrinsic is a little more pragmatic. There's some kind of external influence that's getting you to do whatever it is that you're trying to get to. So, you know, if learning in English is what you're going for, an intrinsic motivation could be that you're interested in it, you personally like it, whereas an extrinsic motivation could be to get a job or because your parents want to. And once students are asked to reflect on what their motivation is for why they're there, it can help them to set those goals and to identify where the motivation's coming from, which goes into the next one of goal setting, and what appropriate goals are for them. All right. Then some common problems. I'm just going to show some common problems that tend to come up in any language class. And just into the chat box, when I show you the message, when I show you the problem, I just want you to think about how could this problem be resolved through some learner training, and which component of learner training do you think it could apply to? And again, the components are learning about yourself, so that's that metacognitive strategy awareness, learning who you are as a learner, learning by yourself of becoming an independent learner, learning from each other of cooperative learning and also interacting with the teacher, the rapport and the dynamic community learning, or learning from yourself, and that's the idea of reflection. So one problem from the first student is that I just started studying English and it's so difficult. How can I be expected to remember so many new words? Which is something that is pretty common with a lot of students. So if you have a student that comes to you with this problem, how could you address it? How could these ideas of learner training help you to address this problem that a student may have? So again, if I show you the options, learning about yourself, by yourself, from each other, or from yourself, which aspect, which component of learner training do you think would be most helpful for this student? Yeah, so Maria Teresa has said to make a vocabulary journal. So that's that idea of kind of independent learning, of teaching them, and also different the strategies of learning about what kind of learner you are, learning about yourself, exactly. From Maria Teresa says that. Carmen says learning about yourself and what works for you. Yeah, learning from each other could also be helpful. So having students work together, if the words are difficult to learn, if there's so many, share responsibility. Yeah, learning from yourself from Josefina. Good. Okay. Yeah, test partners using clues. That's a good one too. All right, we'll go on to another problem. I hate English class. Problem number 2 from students that often comes up. I don't see the point. What good is English going to do me? So why am I learning English? And this happens a lot with students, especially in public schools, or just schools in general, public or private, who have English as a mandatory part of the curriculum, especially when they live in a place where English isn't spoken. They wonder, why do I have to learn this? How is it relevant to me? So as a teacher, how could some of these components of learner training help you to solve this problem that a student might have, that a student might come to you with? All right, let's see, sharing ideas with others and talking about the benefits for the future. Yeah, so that could kind of go with the goal setting idea and looking at motivations for why you're in English class. Why are you here? What's the purpose? Intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. And what is the purpose? And having that discussion with students too of how can English help me in the future? Sharing ideas with each other is another one that comes up. Yeah. Sharing reasons for studying English and checking motivation. Yeah, that's another excellent idea. Rocio also says that in this global world, English is really important. Yeah, so giving examples, you could share success stories, you could talk about things that you need English in order to be able to accomplish. Yeah, this is another good one too. If they want to play video games, so things like that, that if you want to be able to play a video game, to watch a movie, to meet one of your favorite celebrities, you need to be able to communicate. So making them see the presence of English in everyday things like TV, songs, ads, so on. Yeah, from Josefina. Yep. We have, in Peru, it's necessary to learn. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. Yeah, and a lot of times that is the case. That doesn't matter if you like it or not. So having students be aware of why it is that they're learning and what benefit it's going to have to them, and the more you can make it real life, the more they'll feel that it's relevant to them. All right, problem 3. I'm too embarrassed to ask a question in class. I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't understand, and I don't want everyone to think I'm stupid. So one student might not understand something, but they don't want to ask the question because since no one else is asking the question, they think they're the only ones that don't understand, and especially with adolescent students, what their peers think of them is really important. So how would you handle a problem like this using some of these ideas of learner training that we've talked about? Yeah, classic with adult students too, that's true. Learning from each other, yeah, setting goals. Yeah, I think it's that idea. Yeah, here's a good one. Making students feel comfortable and being confident when they're using English in the class and avoiding correction. All right, think, pair, share is one that someone else has come up with. Give students confidence, cooperative learning, small group work, confidence. Yeah, so this has to do a lot with the learning from each other, that idea of building rapport and community in the class. Carmen has a good one. Making it clear that mistakes are part of the learning process. In order to learn, you have to make a mistake, and that's what you learn from. So helping people to not feel embarrassed. And again, that's a task that is easier said than done, but still it's an important lesson to learn. So yeah, I'd tell them that it would be dumb not to ask the question. Yeah, that's good. And not to laugh at each other. Shy students work better in pairs. So that's the other thing too. Rocio brought up that point of having students work in partners or small groups, so that if they do have a question, a shy student is much more likely to ask the question to their one partner instead of raising their hand and asking it to the whole class. So make sure that you're allowing opportunities for them to work in small groups or pairs where they may feel more comfortable. That's a good idea from Daniel too, having a 5-minute session where students can write an anonymous question. So have a little paper at the end, and if a student doesn't have it, they can submit it and ask questions at the end. That way no one knows who asked and the pressure's off of them, so they don't feel like they're being singled out. And also just reminding students just to not be afraid of asking the questions. Creating that supportive learning environment, yeah. Just because they don't understand it, if they don't understand something, someone else probably doesn't understand it either. It just takes one person to ask the question. Yeah, these are great ideas. And from the responses we're getting, you can tell that these are really common problems that come up. All right, problem 4. I don't understand why my teacher insists on speaking in English for the entire class. Doesn't she know we're just beginners? A lot of the arguments that are against teaching English in English for an entire class is that what if the students don't understand? But a lot of teachers will do it, and there's a lot of benefits for immersion learning, but a lot of students don't see it. And they would ask the question of, why are you speaking to me in English when you know that I don't understand English? So how would you respond to a question like that? All right, Maria Rosario says, for beginners using a lot of TPR. So I think a really important thing with that, that's great, is also just finding different ways to make yourself understood. So instead of, if they're not understanding it and you're speaking in English, instead of reverting to Spanish when they don't understand, find different ways, like TPR, start using your body. Start miming things, drawing pictures, using hand gestures. That helps a lot. It goes a long way. Yeah, not only talking and talking is a different one. So if they're not understanding it, find other ways of input. Someone also said they also will complain about it with coordinators. Yes, that's true. People like to complain in general. Yeah, it's necessary for beginners who are involved, who are to be exposed to the language, because that time that you have in the classroom where you're speaking to them in English might be the only time that they have in the day or the week or however often you have class where they can hear English and interact with it. So it's really important that you use it, but it's also important that they understand why you're using it. Yeah. Models and comprehension checks, that's good. A lot of gentleness and understanding. Teaching meaning and explain to students why you're doing it. So that goes back to that idea of learning from each other and being explicit about why you're doing something the way that you're doing it. I mean, oftentimes when I'm teaching, I always like to spend that first couple classes where I just dedicate it to community building and learner training. It's getting students to think about why they're there, how it will help them, and who I am as a teacher and the methods that I'm going to use to teach them.